Welcome to the Awakened Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Nancy Walters. Get ready to create magic and miracles as you lean into your heart's desires. I believe not only does the heart want what it wants, but it knows. This show is a weekly deep dive into what it means to live from an awakened heart. I'll be sharing inspiring stories and real conversations with people just like you, who have turned the ordinary into the extraordinary. My mission is to show you how you too can be connected and heart-centered in every area of your life. Your journey to aligning with more love, more joy, and your wildest dreams come true starts now. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to have you here. Today is the first episode of the Awakened Heart Podcast, and I'm deeply honored and thrilled to have with us today Barry Selby, who is a best-selling author, spiritual guide, sought-after inspirational speaker, and relationship attraction expert. Not only is he all those things, I also consider him a very dear friend. He is a passionate champion for the divine feminine, helping strong, successful women create balance in love, life, and business. He helps women own and express their feminine magnificence in love and in the world. And today's episode, not only do we touch upon that, but also about the divine masculine as well, and how we can help balance each other. And as this is airing today, April 22nd, we are in the middle of the coronavirus and self-isolation and the whole quarantine, and how we can actually self-master ourselves to up level during these times. We have so much time to spend with ourselves, and how we can set ourselves up for success in the long run. Welcome, everybody. I've got Barry Selby here. We've just been having a great little conversation here, and I'm so excited to have you here on the show and for our listeners to hear all your wealth of knowledge. So you're coming from California there, right?
Yes. At the moment, I'm in California, yes.
How are things there right now? I mean, as we're recording this, we're in the middle of that whole coronavirus quarantine.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, California was one of the, I would say, one of the vanguard states, because they were pretty much at the beginning of the shutdown process. And as much as I really appreciate the leadership in this state, it is interesting watching people's reactions to it. A lot of people are cooperating, but I was talking to a friend of mine about how, because people wearing the masks, as we got the order yesterday, the day before, about starting to wear masks as a optional, mandatory, compulsory type thing. It's like, I'm not sure if it's real or not, but people wearing them now, so people start feeling very alienated from each other. It's very interesting to watch people walking around. There are people walking around without masks on, where the kids don't, because I walk in the neighborhood, so relaxed and comfortable. So it's an interesting range, I'll put it that way.
Yeah, the dynamics of it. I've had to not take things personally, because when I go for my walks and people are taking a wide berth, they're taking it seriously here in Oregon, a wide berth around me. I'm like, it's not me, it's not a person.
Don't take it personally. The biggest lessons, by the way, not taking things personally. When this is happening right now, it's so easy to get triggered if you're not remembering your own centeredness. It's like, oh, they did something. It's like, it's not about them. So let go of that. So it's a good lesson.
Yeah, it's a great lesson. And so when this is going to air, it is actually, we're going to still be in the middle of this whole quarantine isolation coronavirus. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens, because there's a lot of growth that happens even during times of turmoil like this. There's going to be a lot of good that actually comes out of it all. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
Like this podcast itself.
Yes, this podcast. Thank you, Barry.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So as I mentioned on the introduction, excited to have you here. And I know you've got such a wealth of knowledge. You're a published author. You're a champion of the divine feminine. You've got self-mastery courses. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about where you came from and where you are right now?
Okay. I'm trying to fit that into a short period of time. You may be able to tell from my accent, I'm not American. I'm actually born and raised in England, where I was raised in a very, I would say, stoic and reserved English, stiff upper lip type family, come from a Jewish background. So I didn't necessarily have a lot of expression as a child or even a young adult. Expression wasn't kind of in our vocabulary. We were very by the book, keeping it disciplined, quiet, stoic. And I didn't really look at it this way, but people looked to me back then and said I was very aloof, they were calling me. I wasn't smiling, happy, joyful like I am now. I've been through a journey. So I would basically just keep things stuffed inside, which most people do a lot of times. Over the course of my education, starting to work and everything else, I ended up coming to LA back in 1984, way back when. No, excuse me, 1981. I lived in Germany and Belgium in between, so I traveled quite a bit, and I knew that I needed to live somewhere else. So my boundaries were being stretched already because I wasn't confined to where I grew up, which is the one thing that was really good for me. Living in LA was what opened my eyes because in '84, 3 years after I'd been here, I was introduced to my first seminar. And the way it happened, just as a fun little story, I'd basically been working in computer programming. I was like very mental, very mindset, and was working in a field where I got to hang out with some other guys. And I got in my green card by this point. And so I was freelancing, working in different companies. And one of the guys I worked with at an aerospace company had just got back from the first night of a seminar. And that's what he said to me. So I'd just been a seminar. I said, "What's a seminar?" I had no idea. This is not even my vernacular understanding of anything. He said it was a workshop basically where he learned some good information, met some cool people, and met some cute women. And I said, "Where do I sign?" That was literally how it happened. It was the funniest thing. I had no idea what I was walking into. So I did my first seminar. It was the Saturday of the first seminar. And it was a dyad practice with somebody else. And the requirements were to find somebody in the room we were most challenged by. And I did the best I could. And I chose this really burly, bulky guy who had like a leather jacket on, a Porsche keychain hanging from his waist, very tanned and looked very tough. And I was very averse to that. So I thought, well, I got to pick this guy because I was going to go for the women. I'm like, no, got to pick this guy. We sat down the dyad, and the process in the dyad was basically talking about how do we hide and how do we avoid being seen. But bottom line was the healing that happened in that process, because I started realizing, and we were told this afterwards, how when we looked at the other person, we saw the reflection in them of who we were. And then afterwards, they did this thing back in the 80s where they played these John Denver songs during the workshop, and they played the song.
John Denver song. Tell me, which one do you remember?
That one was "Come and Let Me Look in Your Eyes." And so basically, after we'd done this diet, and we were both in tears at the end of it, then we had to spend basically 3.5, 4 minutes staring each other's eyes during this song. I was ruined at the end of that in terms of all my defenses were down because I really got clear, not consciously, but I felt something was shifting. And that was the first inkling in my life. I think I can very anchor that moment where I knew that my heart needed support, or I should say my heart needed expression. And so the rest of the workshop was transformational from that point forward. That was Saturday morning. So Saturday afternoon, Sunday and beyond was game changer. I've been doing that work ever since because I knew that was where the life for me was. It was the pivot point for everything in my life that really shifted my focus. But it took me a long time to get really on board with it, to be honest. I was a slow learner. So even though I learned at that point, and I've been in the journey forever since, my external, professional, in the world experience was still maintaining the same role for a long time. It's been a journey.
During one of our conversations, you were telling me about how you've been in this work, but then you had a heartbreak and you went into the divine feminine because you saw somebody walk into the room that really just like you were drawn to, and then just for no reason, she just lit up the whole room. And you're like, I need to talk to her.
That was in 2007. Saying I've been on this journey for a long time. Along the way, I basically did a lot of seminars, workshops, learned how to speak on stage, got a master's degree in spiritual psychology. So very deep in this work. And also had become a spiritual practitioner at my church they go to, the spiritual center. So I had a lot of background in spirituality. However, up to that point, I've been in 3 long-term relationships that really, I would say bluntly, repeated themselves. Different partners, same experience, which is a clue, by the way. I knew something was off. And then this woman walked into the room I was in, or the building I was in. Her name is Kim, by the way. We've been friends ever since. But she walked in, I never met her before, but she was blonde, blue-eyed, tanned, white sundress, and she was glowing. I mean, I won't describe it. She lit up the room, like you said. And I never seen it happen before. But what I really got was that was spirit pushing me, saying, talk to this woman, because it felt like neon signs over her head saying, talk to her, talk to her. At that point, this was 2007, my comfort zone talking to beautiful women was still somewhat challenged. So I was not usually good at talking to women when I was that amazed by them. But I knew I had to say something to her. So I went up to her and said something along the lines of, I'm not sure who you are, but you're glowing. Where have you been? And she burst in laughter, of course. But that was the opening, because what she had done that previous weekend was a retreat that was exploring the masculine feminine conversation, which I'd never experienced before. And it was during that journey afterwards, the next few, I started with 3 different teachers, the trains I dived into, because I knew I had to learn this, was to discover my own masculinity, which I basically vacated forever. And so every relationship I was in, I didn't have that present with them. So the last 3 relationships before that, the women I was with were more masculine than I was, because I vacated the role. But then I also discovered what divine femininity felt like is when a woman embodied it, which again, I'd never experienced fully. The end of the first workshop of that style I was in, where on the last day, the men and women were standing across from each other. And the women were all basically, as the best that they could, embodying their feminine magnificence. And men, we'd been practicing our masculine hearts and depth. And when I saw that that wall of femininity, I was absolutely, one, stunned, two, humbled, and three, basically, I fell into service of that. That's probably the best way of putting it. I knew then my service in the world was to support that, serve that, inspire that, which is why I've always, since that point especially, I've been very passionate about supporting women owning their feminine, because frankly, the way I look at it right now, and it's been said a few times recently, it's time that the women ran the world from the feminine heart. The challenge has been is that women have been trained to act like men in the business world, then in politics. So most women don't do anything different from men when it comes to leadership. And I'm really clear we need to shift that focus to feminine leadership. And I'm absolutely gung-ho supporting that in the world.
That's beautiful. So for our listeners that don't really understand like the whole polarity between masculine and feminine, how would you describe that to them? How do you see, the femininity here in this time and era? How do you see it as now and where it needs to go?
Well, let me just say right up front, the Me Too conversation was part of the crack in the veneer of what we've been doing for a long time. And I've said in some of my talks before about how the business world was created by men for men. Women have been trying to conform to that ever since. And after the sexual revolution in England, it's called the Women's Liberation Movement back in the 60s, there was a shift. Women basically got their independence and went to work. But rather than bringing the feminine into the world naturally, most women had to embody what was being done already, which is the way the men worked. So they copied the men. And in fact, I remember vividly back in the late 60s, early 70s, Twiggy was probably the most famous model of that time, who was flat-chested, broad-shouldered. She had no makeup, short hair, and she wore like a suit. I mean, it wasn't with a shirt, but it was a suit. And it was when people were burning their bras. So the look was becoming very masculine, very male-looking as well. Actually, let me qualify that. Masculine are generally aligned to male and female, but not always. And also, because there are gay relationships or straight relationships, masculine and feminine polarity is what creates attraction. So it works across genders. But generally speaking, most men's natural core is masculine. Most women's natural core is feminine, particularly in heterosexual relationships. So the way that I've explained that, masculine for me is the presence and depth of energy that men bring when they hold space, which when you feel a man in that place, you know what it feels like. For the feminine, it's about flow and movement and light. As I said, my friend who I met was beaming because she really owned her feminine heart. And it was that light that I'd never seen clearly before, because it was never as clear as that before. So when women are in their feminine and really own it, they almost beam a light into the world that is transformative. It basically breaks up the darkness. And yes, the masculine can bring darkness, but usually it's the safety of darkness. It's that depth of presence. In extremes like yin and yang, the masculine is the opposite of feminine. Feminine is life, masculine is death, or it's death rather. Feminine is movement, masculine is stillness. It's that opposition that creates the polarity. And it's also what makes relationships rock, because when we talk about chemistry in relationships, and for a lot of people, chemistry wears off, because chemistry is the opposition, like magnets of polarity that pulls people together. So when a man is his masculine and a woman's in her feminine, if that's natural, there's an attraction because it's almost like north and south poles of a magnet. When relationships get boring, it's because the couple become too much like friends. And what I tell people is you can recharge your chemistry by remembering your natural polarity. So polarity is what we naturally reside in, but we tend to, as people in the world, put on veneers or shields or covers to either protect it or to hide it. So for a lot of us, it's about revealing our natural polarity and authenticity.
So it's about coming from a place of authenticity and really diving deep into who you are, male or female. You've got the inner masculine, you've got the inner feminine. And a lot of us women have been disassociated with that inner feminine because she's been taught as weak, because throughout society, it's like we can do it all. We can do it all ourselves. We don't need a man. And so when you're in that dynamic and you're in a relationship, you've lost that because you're taken away from the man, which is natural instinct to provide and give to a woman. And actually a woman is to receive, and we've been taught to give despite of ourselves. So now it's unlearning everything that we've been taught about, since we've been raised and through what society has given us, and going back to our innate natural nature.
Right. And at the same time, the truth is we carry both inside of ourselves. It's more about remembering which side we want to be on, because for some things we need to be in a masculine, independent of our gender. Mm-hmm. And some things need to be in a feminine, independent of gender. So remembering one, a natural polarity, but also to bring to the table what's needed in that moment. Basically driving cars is a masculine practice. It's directional, it's focused. And men or women driving cars is the same energy. Right. So it's understanding it's okay to have that. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to intimacy, when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to connection, and when it comes to leadership, I believe there's a natural resonance we can be in, which is not one or the other. It's whichever is natural to us. And that's why I say feminine leadership. In simple terms, the way I describe it is masculine leadership generally is competitive and combative. Feminine leadership is collaborative and cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
Because feminine is inclusive energy. The masculine is about getting out there and doing things on our own. That's our strength. But the thing is, in leadership, especially the way we're going in our world now, we need more inclusivity. And that's where the feminine energy comes to its strength.
Yeah, and they've talked a lot about the feminine rising, like we're in the rising of the feminine. And I actually ran across a website, an article about how the masculine should show up in the rising of the feminine. And that's just what you're talking about there. It's like the masculine needs to have a little, embracing more of that femininity in here in themselves, because like the earth is hot, it needs to cool off. And if we continue in this masculine way, we're going to just destroy everything. So it's just getting more into that feminine that's innate in each and every of us, whether we're male or we're female.
In fact, I would say in terms of the leadership, what it feels for me, because again, masculine creates depth and solidity and presence. We can be the rock on which the feminine can rise.
Mm-hmm.
It's a visual I hold for a bit, because I understand the feminine strength is that ability to express and to create, bring light. It doesn't mean the masculine isn't appropriate. In fact, if anything, we can help lift the feminine higher so the feminine can shine even more brightly. So there's a definite cooperation here when it's done in harmony.
Absolutely. I love that. So Barry, you've talked about how you had your awakening. So Barry.
Yes, Nancy.
And you had your breakthrough in that moment. That beautiful woman walked into the room and she just lit up the room. And that's what led you into this whole dance with feminine and the masculine. And then you went to your first seminar because, it's a great way to meet women. So with all that and where you are now, what is lighting you up right now? Where has all this taken to you now? And what is next for you?
That's the thing, because I started doing relationship coaching after I went through my first discovery of the masculine and feminine, because I was so gung-ho and I knew all this stuff. But for the last year or so, I've noticed myself being much more about supporting individuals. I was avoiding that because I thought, well, that's not relationship, that's individuals. But I noticed most of my work was with single people, and mostly single women, because it's to support the feminine. And what shifted it's been for over a year now, I've been talking about self-love as a primary modality to help us come back to ourselves. And that's a lot of work I do. And I created a self-love meditation, which I think you have the link for, which I mentioned later. But then it started coming up back in January, but really after my birthday, which was early March, right before the shutdown happened, apparently. I started thinking about how do I want to talk about this in a bigger way? And because self-love is kind of, unfortunately, somewhat disdained by people, that was wishy-washy, it's easy. I started using the term self-mastery because it's implying we master ourselves. So it's more than just self-love. It's about how do we take care of ourselves, how do we honor ourselves, and how do we become authentic in what we do. And so I started talking about self-mastery, and that led to what I just created recently, which is called the Self-Mastery Revolution, which is an ongoing membership group. I'm going to teach a lot more about those nuts and bolts tools to be more in leadership in our own lives, because that's really what I think we need to find is especially right now we're being shut down, so to speak, is we spend time with ourselves a lot. Mm-hmm. Well, we can Netflix and binge, or we could be doing things that are more constructive and more self-supportive. You can do both, actually, just to be honest. You can still Netflix occasionally. We need to find our way to really govern, own, and respect ourselves and bring that into the world, because as has been shared, I've seen a few videos online by people talking about the new paradigm shift, that we're moving out of the old into the new. I'll see if that really happens after this is over. But what I'm clear about is we can do things now whilst we're in the middle of this journey to restart building up our own self-support structures, to really learn how to read leadership in our own lives so we can start taking charge of our own life in the world. Because if we're still sitting in a place of needing somebody else to fix things for us, we get what we want. So self-support, self-mastery, self-love is where my message is honing into now.
So it's just taking the self-love, because like a lot of people are like, woo, what does that even mean? So if you come to your edges, you really realize everything stems from self-love, but it's also self-mastery. When you self-love yourself, it's the mastery in all other aspects of your life as well.
Yeah, because it's self-respect, self-alignment, self-trust, self-worth, all these different things. That's why I said self-mastery. It's like it's an umbrella title, because it really is every single piece. Yes, self-love is really the lubricant for everything inside of that. It's the governing energy. But it's like when we don't forgive ourselves for our past transgression, so to speak, or we don't forgive our past relationships or parents, if we're judging about how somebody's doing something, if we're withholding a love from somebody out of the world, these are all things that limit us from being fully expressive. So these are all part of what I call self-mastery, because it is time for us to step up in a way that is additive to the world in general, but also additive to each other. So it's stepping into the world in a new way.
Yeah, I find that so important, especially now with how people aren't working, they're at home more. Some good things are coming out of it, like you're seeing them spending more time with their family. But I'm finding a lot of people are bored and they're just drinking more, or they're just don't find anything to do. There are so many things to do that we can prepare ourselves for when this is over, and it's going to be over, to hit the stratosphere when you're done. It's going to really set you up for the rest of the year and the rest of your life. There's so many things to learn, like what have you wanted to do? What do you want to learn about? Now is the perfect time to do all the things.
Oh yeah, you're right. Exactly. I mean, this podcast is the same thing. It's like what you're bringing to the world in this podcast is so additive and constructive. And what I love about it is that people can listen to it anytime they want. This is actually the best time to start binging on podcasts and teachings that can help you be, so you're right. It's time to really level up.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we hit record on this conversation here, we were talking about some of those things. Some of those things, I had talked about listening to mind movies in the morning. I'm just on a Joe Dispenza kick, becoming supernatural, meditating. You're doing another class right now. You're always learning something. So there's things that we can do for our mind, and actually, not just for our mind, but it's for our bodies as well. And I see a lot of fear out there happening right now. And I tell people, don't think that way, because you're actually weakening your immune system when you're going into that fear mindset. You're actually affecting that as well. So the way we set ourselves now can determine our future. So self-mastery, so important. So
absolutely.
I'd love for our listeners to be able to find you. I'm, of course, going to put in the show notes as well. So what is next for you? So where can they find you?
As I said, I'm building out the Self-Mastery Revolution, which basically is, it's a monthly membership. I'm offering an annual membership to make it easier. It's meant to be a low entry fee because people aren't working, people don't want to spend lots and lots of money on major courses. I don't believe. Some people are. They're spending thousands of dollars, but most people who are not working right now or who want to take care of themselves, because we don't have a definite end of when it's going to shift. A lot of people, it's like spending money is a cautious thing. So I made this very easy access to get into, because I want to help people reorient themselves right now in a very effective way. So that's my primary focus. I'm still coaching clients who want to sign up for deeper work, obviously, because some people want to go deep. And also, I'm in the process of, I'll say this publicly, I am working on a second collaborative book with my partner. We have a publishing company, and we're doing volume 2 of Love Revolution. That's coming out later in the year, but we're starting to recruit authors for that. And I'm probably going to write a second book. I've got a feeling it's brewing. I'm not sure what it is yet. I'm not putting anything on the table just yet. But I feel like I have a second book of my own fully. The other book is a chapter book. This is my second of my own books. That's pretty the primary focus. There are other things coming. I can feel them, but they're not descriptive yet.
You can feel them. I don't think you're ever going to slow down. Those sound like some excellent things, and I can't wait to
There's always more to do. There's always more to do, yes.
Yes. So, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on. Just before we go, I want to ask you, since we are the Awakened Heart podcast, how would you describe an awakened heart? What does that mean to you?
Well, I mentioned how way back in my first seminar, I had that experience that just brought me to tears and opened my heart. That was the first inkling that I had a heart to awaken on an energetic level, not just physically, but an energetic level. And for me, it's been almost the guidance system inside my internal navigation system ever since that point. Actually, before that probably, but consciously since that point. So for me, the awakened heart is having a place we can tap into in ourselves. This is where our truth lies. Because above the shoulders in our head, where our brain does all its work, is a great resource. As somebody said a long time ago, the mind is a great servant, but a terrible master. And the truth is, our heart is a massive, powerful energy source, and it's a great master of our lives too. So for me, what Awakened Heart's about is trusting that intuitive wisdom that comes from within. And if you sit down and you're contemplating or just wondering about a question and you feel like a sense or a voice comes through, 90% of the time, when it's not our head, where we know it's not our brain thinking about it, it's from our heart. So trusting that innate wisdom to ask questions where we can sit and listen to those questions, because the other part is the heart takes time. So in a lot of senses, like our brain is always trying to fire off and think of answers to questions. When the answer comes too quickly, oftentimes it's not our heart speaking. So it's important to sit still and be present with ourselves so we can listen more deeply to ourselves. And, it's kind of have that, imagine the devil on one shoulder and angel on the other shoulder. It's like having these two competing voices. And the reality is what I notice is that my mind has answers that are usually okay. They're not always great, but they're usually okay. But my heart's answers that come slightly slower and more calmly, usually, are much more accurate, much more aligned. So heart wisdom for me is much more effective and more aligned to where I'm going. Everything I've been doing now that I've been creating the last few months has been heart-based. I was looking at doing things from my head initially, and I've got like so many notes of things I put down from where I was thinking about stuff, and none of it got touched. But when I started having this clear hit inside to line up to what I'm doing now with the self-mastery, I knew that was the right thing to do. It's like it was an alignment inside. And it's almost like all the circuits are firing, but also all the ideas are in alignment inside. And I felt that come through for me. So Awakened Heart is really having that alignment inside, having that wisdom to come from, and having a place to rest in so that we know the truth is within us. There's no fighting to go get something. So for me, that's really what an Awakened Heart's about.
Oh, I love it. And you actually just gave us tangible takeaways that my listeners can do right now to live from an awakened heart. Thank you so much, Barry. It was such a pleasure having you on. I know that you've got such a wealth of knowledge and there's so many different topics we can tap into. I know I'm going to love having you on here again. We can delve into each of those in more detail, but thank you for coming on right now. And so now my listeners know who you are, and I can't wait to have you back.
Thank you. I appreciate the extended invitation, and thank you for having me on your inaugural broadcast. Thank you so much.
My inaugural broadcast, my first one. Thank you, Barry. It was a pleasure. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Awakened Heart podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, share it with a friend. And if you haven't already, head on over to your favorite podcast app to subscribe, rate, and review. If you have any comments, questions, or feedback, you can reach me at theawakenedheartpodcast.com.